Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Affleck, and today we're here for My Poker Coaching, and we're going to talk about fold equity. The best part about poker is you don't have to show your cards to win the pot. You don't have to make the best hand. That's the beauty of poker, that you can win when they fold. So, fold equity is the amount you gain when your opponent folds to a bet. That's how we're going to define fold equity here. We're going to be talking about it a lot in this video. So, the important thing to kind of recognize for a baseline here is to start with everyone's dealt the same amount of equity. Um, Everyone gets the same distribution of cards. Everyone over the long run, everyone's going to get the same amount of pocket aces, kings, queens, jacks, seven deuce, three deuce, all the awful hands, great hands. Everyone's going to get the same distribution of those hands over the long run. The long run might be very long, but trust me, everyone gets the same distribution. You just kind of hope, if you're playing a tournament, you get your 10 aces in the one tournament. So your job is to steal more equity from your opponents. So, if there wasn't any fold equity or if everyone was just all in every hand, there'd be no skill edge in poker. Your job's to steal equity from your opponents, get them to fold when they shouldn't, and retain as much equity as you should. You want to over realize your equity and force your opponents to under realize theirs. So let's repeat that again. This is very important. You want to over realize your equity or your distribution of cards, and you want to force your opponents to under realize their equity or their distribution of cards. That's how you make money in poker. It's kind of as simple as that, but we all know it's a lot more complicated as well. So let's look at an example, very basic example of fold equity. So you have pocket queens on 10, 8, 7 deuce, and you know your opponent has ace 5. They've shown you their cards. Uh, so presume if you bet, they're going to fold. So they have nothing. They have ace high. And if you check, they're never going to bluff. So that's the important part here. They're never going to bluff. So there's no value in checking with your pocket queens here. The pot's $100, so we can have some easy math. And ace 5 has, if you run in an equity calculator, has a 6.82% equity or chance to win the pot. They only have 3 outs to the ace. So their hand is worth $6.82. You just take the 6.82% equity they have times the $100 in the pot. So if we just run out the cards with no betting, they get back $6.82. But this is poker. We can bet and they have to fold because they have nothing here, and we could just have pocket tens or pocket eights and they could be drawing dead with their ace, or there's a lot of reasons why they would fold here. So when you bet and force them to fold, well, now you get $100. You don't get $93, which was your actual equity here. What is it, $93.18? That's what you were supposed to get, but now you're getting $100. So you've stolen money from your opponents. You've won money that doesn't belong to you, and this is what poker is all about, and how fold equity, how we kind of want to think about it. So we've denied equity. Denied is a key word here, and not let our opponents see a free card to hit their 3 outs. So the more fold equity you have based on your opponent's tendencies and range, the more you make by betting. So what do we mean by that? So opponent tendencies and ranges. So let's say you have an opponent that whenever they hit, they always bet themselves. So whenever the flop comes out, if they connect with it, they bet. If they miss, they check. Very simple scenario. Well, in this spot, let's say you call them in position and the flop comes out and they check. Well, their range is probably pretty weak because they just bet when they have something and they check when they miss. So you have a lot of fold equity in this spot because they have a very weak range. Um, Another example of when opponents have a weak range is you raise the button, they call. They call with a really wide range of hands in the big blind. The flop comes king, seven, deuce, rainbow. It's not very connected, very dry. They probably miss the flop a lot. You have a lot of fold equity here because the big blind's range is very weak and misses a lot. So opponents' tendencies, do they check very weak, bet strong? How do they construct their ranges? And just knowing the situation, the more you make by betting, identifying how much fold equity you have. So pretty intuitive. Larger bets usually have more fold equity than smaller bets. So when you bet very big, you don't get as good a price on your bluff, because you're risking more money to win the same amount of money. You're always risking to win the same amount. When you bet small, you get a better price when you bluff. So let's say a larger bet, let's say you bet $75 into a pot of 100, or you bet $25 into a pot of 100, you're risking the same different amounts to win the same $100. So it's kind of important to know the pot odds, or just the intuitive understanding of what price you're giving yourself on a bluff. Um, your table image is pretty important. Do the people perceive you as this over aggressive player, a very passive player, a very tight player? All these things feed into how much fold equity you have, how much your opponents are going to call you when you bet. So knowing these types of things is very important to understanding your fold equity. Another thing that people often don't think about, or need to think about more, is how your opponents think about pot odds and fold equity themselves. So, do they fold the small bets too often? So, a lot of players, in my experience, let's say that pot's $100 and you bet $25, the first thing out of their mouth is, that bet's, you're trying to milk me. That's a really milky bet there. You can't be bluffing for that size. And they just think about the value range. And it's like, true, I should be value betting a lot when I bet $25 into 100 because I'm giving you good pot odds. So I know you're going to call a lot. So therefore, I'm not going to bluff that often. I'll bluff sometimes, but uh, most of the time I'm going to be value betting. And so their intuition is right that like, oh, but like it's still, you're going to be bluffing roughly. You're betting 25 to win 100. You should be bluffing about 20% of the time and value betting about 80% of the time. But it's the recency bias of opponents, because yeah, I'm only bluffing 20%, so they're going to see a value bet a large percentage of the time from me. So now they just like, now they start folding a little bit too much when I bet small, and I that's where you get them, because they start folding too much to these small bets. So, but now let's look at the same opponent. Let's make the pot odds very simple. $100 in the pot. Do they call large bets too often? So you bet $100 and they go, well, that big bet seems very bluffy. Big bet seems very bluffy, right? And it's like, yes, I'm going to bluff more when I bet large. A larger percentage of my range is going to be bluffs because I'm risking more. So I'm giving myself a less better price, but I win more money also with my value bets. So when I bet $100, my range, like maybe I'm bluffing, should be about like a third of the time now. I should be bluffing and value betting like 67% of the time. Um, how do opponents perceive these large bets? Do they think they're very value bet heavy? Do they think they're bluff heavy? And recognize that you're getting worse pot odds when you bet large. So you need a lot of fold equity when you're betting larger. You need to know your opponent's going to fold. And if they call these large bets too often, well, maybe you don't want to bluff as much now with a large bet because they don't fold to them. So thinking about how your opponent perceives bet sizing and um, bluffs and value bets is very, very important, because it determines how much fold equity you have with small bets or large bets. So a very important concept here that I preach to my students, I preach in my webinars a lot, is target the autofolds. Autofolds, autofolds, autofolds. Okay? This is the king of fold equity. So let's look at an example. You raise the button with ace-5 diamonds. The big blind calls. The flop is 10 of spades, 5 of clubs, 3 of spades. So a lot of people think here is like, well, I got a decent flop here for my ace-5, but there's a flush draw, and I really want to charge that flush draw. So they might want to bet big here to charge that flush draw. Where in reality, the hands they really want to target are the auto folds. Hands like King 8 offsuit, Jack 7 offsuit, Queen 9, 8 7, 9 8, King 6. All these hands that just have 2 overcards. There's a lot of hands with 2 overcards to a pair of 5s. And a lot of those hands are going to fold also. So the key thing here is a flush draw is never folding, right? Now, when I say no matter what amount you bet, like you have to bet massive, like multiples of the pot to get them to fold this flush draw. But most people, you're not going to fold the flush draw. That's not what you're targeting here on the flop. You're targeting the auto folds, right? These are the hands that have pretty good equity. Like let's look at a hand like 9-8. It can turn an open ender on a jack. It can hit a 9 or an 8. The 7's a pretty good card. A 6 is a decent card. A lot of hands where like they are going to turn, and you don't want them to realize their equity with 9-8. There's a pretty good chance to beat your ace-5 by the river. So by betting now, you can get 9-8 to fold. But if 9-8 knew you had ace-5, it would call because it's getting good pot odds, and it has a good chance to win the pot. But 9-8 can't call because sometimes you're going to have a pair of tens here, right? They don't know you have a 5. You might have a 10. You might have pocket jacks because they were in the big blind and you raise the button. So the 9-8 has to fold because of the fear that their 9 and the 8 are not that good. They're not going to realize all their equity by the river. And so you use that to your advantage and you bet your ace-5 and get 9-8 to fold. These are the types of target the auto folds in the range there. And by betting big to charge the flush draw, they're not going to fold anyways. So you're just making a huge pot, and you actually condense their range more to being having a flush draw because the bigger you bet, the more they fold, and therefore the more they're going to show up with a flush draw by the river. So you're actually accomplishing the opposite of what you want to accomplish when you have that mindset. So targeting the auto folds, betting these hands that are always going to fold, that have decent equity against your hand. Let's look at a different example of fold equity. Very common spot in tournament poker. So you have 15 big blinds on the button, and most players don't realize it's very profitable that it folds you on the button. You have 9-8 suited. You should just go all in for your 15 big blinds. Shove it all in, risk your 15 big blinds to win the blinds and antes. And most people think of this as a very reckless play. But in reality, it's actually a very, very profitable play and probably the best action that you should choose in this spot. So the likelihood of the blinds getting a premium hand is low. Likelihood of getting a hand that can call your bet is very low when you bet 15 big blinds. When you get called, 9-8 suited still has a decent amount to win. Like, that's the part that people don't realize. They only think about the downside, but not the upside. Most of the time they're going to fold. When they do call, they have king queen. You're going to win the pot a lot against king queen. 9-8 suited's a good hand. You make straights, you make flushes, you make pairs. And sometimes a better way to think about why you should shove with 9-8 suited is, and we're going to look at the math here in a second of why you should shove. But another way to think about it is look at the alternative here. Let's say the alternative is you raise to 2 big blinds. So now we allow the big blind to realize their equity. So let's say the opponent has king 8 in the big blind. If you shove for 15 big blinds, they're going to fold king 8, right? Not a very good hand. So they fold. But if you raise to 2 big blinds, now they call because they only have to call 1 big blind. So they're getting great pot odds. And king 8, you don't really want that hand in the pot because it dominates you. So now the flop comes 8-5-4. Maybe they bet out, maybe they check, you bet, they shove, you have top pair, you don't have many chips, you're like, okay, I have top pair, let's go. And you get stacked by king 8. That's not good. Or maybe they have king 7. So the other thing is we don't realize all of our equity when we raise the 2 big blinds. So let's look at the example we raised with 9-8 suited, and they have king 7. Okay, so they have king 7, and all right, that's fine. We have 2 live cards. Let's say the flop comes 7-3 deuce with a spade, 7-3 deuce rainbow. You have 9-8 of spades. They check. You bet because they probably missed the flop a lot on 7-3 deuce, and now they go all in with their pair of sevens because they want protection. Lots of overcards that can come, and you go, uh-oh. Well, I have 2 overcards now. I have 9-8 suited. It's a pretty good hand, and I don't know what to do now. And you fold because you have 9 high. You don't want to risk your chips calling off a 9 high, but in reality, your 9-8 suited has a really good chance to win against that king 7. You did not. They used fold equity against you now. So by going all in, you realize all your equity, and you deny equity from your opponents. So you don't want to go all in with trash. But 9-8 suited has the combination of it gets some dominated hands to fold, so it benefits when they fold. You get better hands to fold, and when they do call, you still have a really, really good chance to win. It's the same thing with like why you might go all in with pocket threes. You're not happy when they call because you're flipping. However, when you go all in, they fold Jack 10, 10 9, 10 8. They fold all these hands. Every hand's flipping. So whenever they fold, it's really, really good for you. You do not go all in for 15 big blinds when you have pocket aces. You just raise to 2 big blinds because you don't want them to fold. There's no hand they have that you're happy when they fold. If you have pocket deuces, they have every hand that they're happy. That's why you see people go all in with pocket sixes and pocket fives, or like ace 8 suited or something like that, but they fold or they just raise to two big blinds when they have ace king or kings or aces because they want to induce action. So let's run through the math here of this example with the 9-8 suited. Small blind will call you 20% of the time. We can estimate that using a program like Equilab. Um, and let's say the big blind will call us 25% of the time. They're getting kind of better pot odds. They're closing the action, so they call a little bit more often. So the probability that one of them will call you is roughly 40% of the time. So we get that. We multiply 80% the time the small blind folds times 75%, which is the time this is a big blind folds. You get roughly 40%. We've kind of rounded these numbers, make it simpler math. When called, we still win about 40% of the time with 9-8 suited, somewhere around 35-40%, depending on what range calls us. We can use a program like Equilab, and you plug in that we have 9-8 suited. You plug in they have, pocket fives are better, ace seven are better, king 10 are better, queen jack are better. We give them that range, 25% of hands, whatever, 20-25% of hands. We're still going to win 40% of the time, and that's the important part here. And we can run this equity math equation to show that, well, here we go, 60% of the time they fold and we win 2.5 big blinds. That's one big blind for the big blind, half a big blind for the ante, and half a big blind for the small blind, and one big blind for the ante. That's 2.5. You win 60% of the time, and that's worth 1.5 big blinds. 0.6 times 2.5 is 1.5. So that's 60% of the time. 40% of the time they call. So this adds up to 100. 40% of the time they call, and we win 40% of the time here, and that pot is 31.5. That's 15 from us, 15 from them, plus 1.5 of the blinds and antes. So we win that pot roughly 40% of the time, so 0.4 times 31.5, and then we minus 15 because the rest of the time we lose 15 big blinds. Times that all by 0.4, that comes out to we lose almost one big blind, 0.96 big blinds whenever they call. 1.5 minus 0.96, we are making 0.54 big blinds of profit. That might not sound like a lot, but it's massive. And poker is a game of small edges that you press over and over and over and over again. Half a big blind edge, just trust me, is a lot. It's also, too, you can't make a mistake here. You're just going all in. You can't make a post flop mistake where you don't value bet enough, or you don't, bluff enough, you don't call enough. All these things where maybe you don't win as much money as you should post flop because you make a mistake. Well, by going all in, you kind of eliminate all that as well. Poker's a hard game, especially if you're playing against if a superstar is in the big blind. All in's probably the better play than raising to two big blinds and giving the potential to make a mistake post flop. So in summary, it's important to remember, poker's a long run game, and playing aggressively is going to result in losses sometimes for sure, and that's okay. Um, it's really important just to embrace the swings of the game. I really like to use that word. You have to embrace the swings, and the more you try to control the variance in poker, the more variance you actually create for yourself. And once you can kind of internalize that a lot better, I think it's kind of the better poker player you will become. A lot of that is, keeping a proper bankroll. Having a proper bankroll allows you to embrace those swings better. Winning poker, you want to find a game you can beat, play it a lot, keep a proper bankroll. It's more complicated than this, we all know, but it's also, you want to break it down to a lot of simpler terms as well. Um, Thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it. Please like, please subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.